Hi everyone, I'm Chris Day from Major League Lacrosse with breaking news of a trade today between the Florida Launch and the Rochester Rattlers. Here are the specifics of the trade. The Rattlers acquire face-off specialist Mike Poppleton along with Kevin Rice and a 6th-round supplemental draft pick next year from the Launch in exchange for Miles Thompson and a 4th-round pick in the Collegiate Draft in 2016. Joining me now, MLL analyst Evan Washburn to help me break down the trade. And Evan, when people see this trade, the headlines are going to read Miles and Lyle Thompson reunited with the Florida Launch. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think this is fantastic for lacrosse fans, and especially those in Florida that get to chance to see these two reunite. We all know what they did at their time in Albany and winning the co-Tewaaraton co-winners in 2014. It's obvious. They have unbelievable on-field chemistry. The trust is something you just don't see on a regular basis. Now, Lyle Thompson's transcendent talent, and Miles Thompson's a solid finisher, an All-American at the collegiate level. I think he's at his best when he's playing with brother Lyle. So I think you'll see the best of Miles Thompson, and then it just elevates any chance of seeing Lyle be the transcendent talent he's been at the college level now at the pro level. But there's a ton of questions that surround this, and we'll get into this, but the obvious personnel of Florida now becomes interesting.
Yeah, and actually that's where I was going to go with the next question. I mean, they now have on attack, on paper, last year's Rookie of the Year, Kieran McArdle, last year's MVP, Casey Powell, and the Thompsons. So not all four of them can play attack at the same time. They seem to be weak at the midfield. Can they use some of the attack surplus to help them in midfield? How do you see this maybe shaping out if you were Stan Ross?
Well, here's what I think. They also have Chad Tutton and Connor Busick coming in as draft picks. Those are traditional midfielders, so they'll help that midfield unit. But the four attackmen you mentioned, Miles, Lyle, Casey Powell, Kieran McArdle, are four players you want on the field as much as possible if you're Stan Ross. Just thinking of it right now, I would imagine that Kieran McArdle will be the guy that plays out of the box as a midfielder. He's done that in the past. He has the capability of doing that. He's a dodger. He's a finisher. He can still have that impact. I honestly think that Kieran McArdle is a much better player than Miles Thompson, especially at the pro level. He's proven. But you can't ignore the fact that Miles and Lyle have this unbelievable chemistry that you want to capitalize. You just traded away your high draft pick in Kevin Rice, a solid faceoff guy, to bring in Miles. So I think initially it will be Lyle, Miles, and Casey Powell at the attack spot. Kieran McArdle will add to a midfield that would include Connor Busick and Chad Tutton along with Stephen Brooks. But if Kieran McArdle's not getting enough run, I'd have to question things a little bit. Lyle Thompson can play midfield, but again, you want him on the field as much as possible. You want him every offensive possession touching the ball. So I think he would stay at attack despite being able to play some midfield. And I think Casey Powell at this age and wanting to not wear him down, he'll stay at attack as well. So I think Kieran McArdle's the guy that moves to midfield. But if you're Stan Ross, you got to make sure he still gets his run, stays in rhythm, because he's just too good to keep off the field.
And from the Rochester perspective, we all saw what Greg Renlian did to them, in particular in Week 1, winning 24 of 26 faceoffs as the Lizards steamrolled the Rattlers there in Week 1. It's gotten a little better, but certainly filled what has been their biggest hole to this point by acquiring Poppleton with John Ortolani out. They've desperately needed a faceoff guy. And Kevin Rice is a player a lot of people are very, very high on. So your thoughts on what Rochester's getting in this trade?
Well, I think Mike Poppleton is a much-needed add of depth, if you will. John Ortolani, as you mentioned, coming off injury, he's solid. He hovers around 40 to 50%. He struggles at times with the elite guys like Anthony Kelly and Greg Renlian, and that's kind of the same thing with Mike Poppleton. He's 55% on the season, but that's based off of 2 games against Chesapeake, and he's a guy that I've yet to see. He dealt with some knee injuries as well that is really at that level or even close to those of Renlian and Anthony Kelly. But again, it adds depth to a position of need. The Kevin Rice thing to me is fantastic. Jordan Wolf is still your quarterback. He's still your dynamic playmaker at the attack position. And Kevin Rice can fit right in. He's good off ball. He's an incredibly intelligent lacrosse player. So I think he'll find a role with that attack, and he'll be more effective than Miles Thompson was if you look at it in that way, where it's a trade for Miles Thompson really for Kevin Rice. I think Kevin Rice will be much more effective in that offense than Miles Thompson was. He's a local guy, grew up in Skinny Atlas, played at Syracuse, obviously, who knows when they'll get him. Syracuse is a team I think will be in championship weekend. But if he's prepared to play professional lacrosse whenever his college season ends, I think he adds a nice element to that offense.
So again, just to recap the trade, Rochester acquiring Mike Poppleton and Kevin Rice and a supplemental draft pick next year from Florida for Miles Thompson and the 4th-round pick in the college draft next year. So Evan, begs the question, who wins the trade?
Well, I'll look at it in 2 parts. From a big picture lacrosse community and fan stance, I think Florida won the trade. The fact that we get to watch Lyle Thompson and Miles Thompson play together once again, whether you're in Florida or when they're on the road or watching on television, we all win because they can do some special things on the lacrosse field. From a strictly lacrosse perspective, analytical perspective, I think that this helps Rochester in the immediate win games. And I think that if they can get Kevin Rice healthy, and at some point whenever his Syracuse season ends, I think that's a better addition to their offense than maybe Miles Thompson was. So on the field this season, I think it's for Rochester. Big picture and maybe down the road, I think it's probably Florida.
He's MLL analyst Evan Washburn. Evan, thanks as always for your time and insight.
Of course.